And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, speak enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Milja, and with me I have a newcomer into the temple, coming to us from Broken Door Entertainment, creators of the Paragons RPG, which we'll be getting into tonight. The one and only Josh Simmons. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing all right. It's great to be here. As you were going through that intro, I was like, oh, okay, I'm in the right spot. I can tell.
So, one of the traditions around here is opening with the humble beginnings, the origin story, if you will, which is especially appropriate given the subject matter. So, walk me through your first introduction to role-playing games and what made it stick.
I came to tabletop role-playing games through wargaming. I took a class all about the Lord of the Rings and Middle-earth in college a number of years back. And the professor who taught that class was a big wargamer and would break out these massive maps, and we would play through all the major, climactic battles from the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings as part of class. And so I started playing those games, and then one of my classmates, because I was really getting into it, I liked the strategy and the mechanical aspects of it, was like, hey, I think you'd really enjoy playing this little game called Dungeons and Dragons. We meet on Tuesdays. Do you want to come join us? And I was like, oh, I mean, this is fun, yeah, but I'm not that big of a nerd. I don't know about it. And he asked a couple times, and eventually I was like, you know what? Okay, fine. I'll try it out. You think I'll like it, so I'll give it a shot. Here we are. Seems like a decade later, and I've been doing this thing for a long, long time. I've played a whole lot of games. I've been in and around the tabletop game industry for 4 or 5 years now, and I haven't looked back.
All right, I can certainly get that. When you mentioned wargaming and then brought in Lord of the Rings, my mind immediately went to the Lord of the Rings war games that was done by Games Workshop, which they've had stop and start support with over the years.
Yeah, call me a bad fan. I don't actually distinctly remember what the mechanics were anymore. I think it was based off of something that my professor had found, and then there were definitely some homebrewed tweaks to it. I think to make it a little more accessible to a group of college students who, some of them were super into it and willing to learn all the rules, and some of them less so, and were there to roll dice and play with pretty miniatures and
everyone can
screw around for 3 hours.
Everyone falls to the siren song of the shiny math rocks.
It's true.
The one blasphemous thing you can say to anyone is, you have enough dice.
Well, I mean, I do have a lot of dice. I would argue that there's always room for more, but I do have a lot of dice.
See?
It's true. But yeah, that's how I got into tabletop gaming. And then, like I said, over the past couple years, I've been in and around the industry. I've done a little bit of game design. I've published some things for the DMs Guild online, some things on DriveThruRPG, did some little, one-page and micro RPGs on itch.io, and so, just kind of the natural progression of things was eventually I was gonna write my own game system, and here we are.
Just out of curiosity, when you jumped around, it sounds like you jumped around a bunch of different systems, and since Paragons is very much a supers game, it is wearing that kind of thing on its sleeve. There's a handful of supers games I I want to throw a few names your way, and see if these were entries that you were familiar with, that you tooled around with, anything to that extent. Basically, consider it the nerdiest Rorschach test you will ever take.
Okay.
So, I'll break out the big guns. Champions.
I've never played it, but I did skim through the rules just to get a sense for how it played.
Alright. I'm kind of cheating with this next one, but since it's been brought up plenty of times with other Supers games, I am obligated to bring it up here. City of Heroes.
I've never actually dug into that one.
Like, a lot of people will swear by City of Heroes as far as being a Supers video game. Like for them, that is the peak. And as somebody who's played his fair share of City of Heroes, I'm not gonna call it the peak, but I'm going to say I can see where people see that. So, continuing on from that, Mutants and Masterminds.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Mutants and Masterminds. Our name kind of, in a little way, pays tribute to Paragon, the setting in Mutants and Masterminds. So yeah, I've read through that. I've never actually had a group to play it with, but spent some time, kind of studying the system, trying to figure out what did and didn't work with it.
Probably spent a few hours in the atomic think tank.
Yeah, I've done a lot more reading of tabletop game systems and specifically superhero game systems than I probably care to admit. But it's been quite a few hours.
Okay, so this is a bit of an umbrella, but any of the Marvel and DC TTRPGs that have come out over the last 40 years.
Yeah, I am a big fan of Marvel Supers, and then I was working at a company that partnered with Marvel when the recent Marvel Multiverse role-playing game came out, so I had to learn that one for work, and so I am very, very familiar with the bones of that system because I had to answer questions about how it worked to new players who were like, "Hey, you work for a company that knows a thing or two about this game. What does this do? How does this ability pair with that ability? What exactly does this term mean in the game system?" And I'd have to be able to answer it. So I put a lot of time into that system in particular.
Yeah, there's some things I could say about Marvel Multiverse, but that's another story. I may tell you that story when I'm off the air.
It works for me.
Now the reason why I say that's an umbrella is Marvel and DC have had multiple takes on the TTRPG treatments. Obviously, with Marvel, you've got the OG that is Marvel Phase Rip, also known as Classic Marvel or MSH. I call it Phase Rip because, well, one, I'm not paid by the syllable, and two, that's how it was pitched to me. So why reinvent the damn wheel?
Everybody knows Phase Rip.
Yeah. And three, I'm stubborn enough to insist on calling any sort of casserole hot dish because I'm from Minnesota. That's what you're supposed to do.
There you go, a Midwestern true and true.
Yeah, and of course there's been that, which I'm not sure how familiar you are with that one. Then there was the diceless Marvel. There was the card-based affair with the adventure game, which is something of a hidden gem, mostly because of the timing. This was 90s TSR. Then there's the Marvel Universe game, where Marvel decided to try and do a TTRPG themselves in the early 2000s, and do it diceless, which was not the smartest move in my opinion. I covered it. That game's been treated kind of like the redheaded stepchild, and they thought it could compete with D&D 3rd edition, which this was 2002.
Yeah. Third edition, for many of its flaws, did a very good job of kind of reinvigorating the D&D fan base between third edition and 3.5. It's a very memorable edition in the history of tabletop role-playing games. So I have a hard time believing that anyone could rival it at the time.
Well,
maybe Pathfinder. But
it's
I appreciate the optimism.
Yeah, it's more of a context thing, and also this was right around the time when Marvel was going through their lengthy drama of bankruptcy court, which I do not have enough alcohol to try and summarize. I will simply say it's like what would happen if the Three Stooges wrote a John Grisham novel.
Now I could actually picture that.
Yeah. You had like 5 different factions in court, and all of them hated each other. When I say hate, I mean open hostility whenever any one of them was in the courtroom.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Including a trustee that the judge appointed to oversee things on the business side of things.
Yeah. Well, man. Corporate interests and capitalism, really, they've done a number on us as a society, I feel like, but that's a whole different soapbox, and we don't have to get into that right now.
Yeah, and if I'm being honest, the issues that I saw with that, I've seen with I've seen just as much pettiness with small businesses. So yeah, anyone who wants to say it's just big corps who are just being petty, no. Let he who is without sin throw the first stone. But obviously there was also the short-lived Marvel Heroic, which did win some awards, and then Multiverse. As far as why Marvel Heroic only lasted like a year, I've had some rumors be sent to me, but I don't have anything concrete, which is odd because it actually won an Origins award.
Yeah, I mean, at that time, Origins was maybe in a little better standing in the community and the industry than it has been in recent years. So that's no small feat.
I haven't been to the Origins Awards, and I know that if I do, I'm gonna cause some kind of chaos. If something that I make ends up winning an award, I will pull a Shane Douglas with the trophy.
Okay, well, if you do ever go and do something like that, let me know so that I can be in attendance.
I appreciate that you hopefully got the reference.
Yeah. Look. I'm all about having a good time.
Mm-hmm. But with that in mind, when it comes to Paragons, obviously when I looked through the quick start, I definitely saw some of the Year Zero engine's DNA, especially the die mechanics. But you've also cited Shadowrun and World of Darkness and PBTA. Was Paragons a case of a game that you were running that just house ruled its way into its own thing, or was there a different path to its origins?
Yeah, so I do most of my best creative thinking. I'm a shower thinker. And so one day I was, sitting in the shower, not literally sitting, but, metaphorically sitting in the shower. And I was going, okay, I've got this idea for like a feeling of play style for a tabletop game. What mechanics are going to get me that feeling? And I had recently, read through the Year Zero engine, and I liked bits and pieces of it. But, there were a couple of things that I felt, that I wanted to try differently. And so, it's kind of just been this accumulation of like things that I've really enjoyed in tabletop role-playing games over the past few years that eventually, I kind of pieced things together to get to where we are today. So, the Shadowrun inspiration really comes. Mostly, I'm attributing it to, 5s and 6s on the dice. We've obviously, got 6s acting as crits that grant 2 successes, rather than being a single success. But, I was talking with someone from Catalyst Game Labs recently at a convention, and, they jokingly said, Shadowrun is just, grab a fistful of dice, and that's probably not enough, and that's how you play the game. And there's a component of our game design philosophy for Paragons where we really said, let's come up with more new ways to add dice into our dice pool, because more dice is fun. And so we're obviously not the first game system out there to use dice pools, but we definitely wanted to allow for freedom and flexibility for people to be able to creatively add dice to their dice pool, and to roll lots of dice, because it's really satisfying to get 15 dice in your hands and roll them all, and then also not have to do the math, adding the results of 15 different dice that you've rolled. So that's where some of that inspiration comes from. But also, we pulled some stuff from Powered by the Apocalypse systems, a superhero game that I really like for what it is Masks: The Next Generation, which is teenage coming of age superhero tabletop role playing game. And so a lot of the story and the conflict has to deal with the heroes and the characters, coming to overcome their own internal conflict and understanding their place in the world. And so, a lot of the superheroing, the combat mechanics and whatnot kind of feel like set dressing for, a teen coming of age drama. And that's what, that game system does very well. But I do really, think that the flexibility of PBTA mechanics lend themselves nicely to that kind of story. And so, we stole a couple of things, the idea of moves rather than, rolling particular skills. We've got a set number of moves, and then kind of each of our archetypes borrow very loosely from the concept of playbooks from Powered by the Apocalypse games. We've kind of put our own twists and spins on them. It's not quite the same, but we definitely took some inspiration from there. Another dice pool system that we borrowed ideas and mechanics from is the World of Darkness games.
Any entries in the World of Darkness specifically? Because that's a wide net.
I would say, most specifically, I have spent a lot of time playing Vampire V5. And so while the dice pool mechanics are loosely the same in terms of, how you might add dice to other systems, I do think particularly where we got will and resist, you can draw not a direct line, but there's some parallels from how superficial and aggravated damage work in V5 that I think were an inspiration. And as I was thinking about, well, how should damage work in this game that I'm thinking up on the fly? So those are some of the inspirations. There are plenty more. I did a brief stint late last year running a lot of Candela Obscura games, which is the kind of horror, mystery, supernatural exploration game that the folks at Critical Role released. And I definitely took some of the feelings and the vibes of that game into consideration as I was, writing this, because I think that it does a very good job of capturing the feelings of what that game is trying to accomplish. And I think a game where you can have mechanics that feel very coded for like the genre of game that it is. In that case, it's, kind of supernatural, otherworldly, mystery type stuff. But there's a very real sense of, like eldritch horror and gothic horror involved. Obviously we're doing superheroes. It's a very different genre, and so the flavor is going to be very different, and the way that the mechanics work is going to be very different. But that was probably the last game system that I think very heavily like influenced, very broadly my like approach to game design before I actually like sat down and went from, okay, here's a few pages of concepts and notes to, okay, here's a working document for the rules in this game.
Yeah, I can get that. Now, what's interesting when it comes to Supers games is there's a certain reputation that they have, and by extension, because they're a bit downstream from it, Universalist games also have this reputation of having a bit of a higher floor because of the material because of all the different types of material that is covered under the umbrella of Supers. I mean, you just look at either the universes of the big two, or even smaller stuff like, say, Valiant or Image. There's a lot of genres and subgenres that are covered. You have your supernatural end of things. You have your horror adjacent things. You have the cosmic stuff. You have the street level stuff. All of that under one umbrella, and that and because of that, you end up with two ends of a pendulum. One end is the type that is on the crunchy end of things, where building powers and weaknesses and managing points becomes a big deal. This is where you get stuff like Mutants and Masterminds, stuff like the hero system / champions. It's complicated. Those sorts of affairs. And then on the other end of things, you have ones that do not have a full-on set of crunch for it, but just have just describe how your power works and go with it. And as much as I like Masks, it kind of falls into this category. Base Raiders did, which was a interesting take on the Supers motif with using Fate. And I would also say most PBTA adjacent games are going to fall into that category. And Candela Obscura to a point as well, but I'll get into that another time. I have some history with that game.
Sure.
But because of that perception of a high floor when it comes to doing Supers, how do you address that within the archetype system that you have for Paragons, so that people can make the superhero that they've had in their head without drowning in the same level of crunch that you might in, say, Mutants and Masterminds or Champions?
Yeah, so our solution to that, I'm going to be honest with you. Like we took a stab at something that I think is a really neat idea, and I think answers that, kind of tension that you have to design a game for. But that's where like playtest feedback is really valuable, and we're still doing playtest for another month or so here. And then, who knows, maybe somewhere down the line we can take additional feedback and make a second edition of the game or something. But we've tried to make it really easy to get your character initially created. So, archetypes are all about giving you talents. They're special things that only you can do, but like they're not make or break things that are going to distinguish your character really from another character. I'd like to say when I'm explaining the game to new players that they're more like descriptive of how you might act rather than prescriptive for how you have to act. But, right, for instance, we could take any, notable hero. I'll use Spider-Man, for instance, right? He could be an acrobat archetype, but you could also play him as a defender archetype or a facilitator archetype. And there are probably a couple others, if we sat and really thought about it, that you could say, oh, yeah, well, I could play Spider-Man like this, or oh, I could play Spider-Man like that. So we're trying to give you a toolbox there to make a character. And the way that our abilities work is, very similar to is we're saying, okay, here's a floor, right? You have powers that let you control fire. You can determine what it looks like when you control fire, and how exactly that works in terms of the physics or, metaphysics of how magic or, whatever the source of your power is that grants it to you. You can figure that out. It's not super important mechanically to know how you get it, just that you have it. And so you can just tell us how you get it in your origin story, and it's, more flavor than it is mechanics there. But where we really try to add a level of crunch and add a level of customizability is once you've created your character, we have a system for training abilities. And we cut probably 70% of the training section when it went into the quick start guide, and it's actually eventually going to there's going to be a whole section in the book about training, but we really just wanted to take a quick summary and put it in the moves section in the character creation chapter in the quick start guide, just so people get a taste for it. But the idea is, great, so you have flame control powers, but now in your downtime you can say, hey, I want to train my flame control powers, and I want to learn to control flames with my feet because I'm a dancer, and so as I dance I want to control the fire. Or, hey, you know what? I'm going to train my flame control because I want it to be stronger. I want my heat to burn hotter, and I want to do more damage. And so then you work with the GM to determine how many successes you need. And then over time, it's probably not something you're going to do successfully in a single training session, but over, 2 or 3 training sessions, or more difficult, things maybe take 5, 6, 7 training sessions. You refine that skill, and then you can do that additional thing that you want to do, whether that's dealing more damage or controlling it in a different way. And so there are some ways mechanically that you can change the way your ability works, whether that's, more focused on AoE type attacks, where it's, a range of enemies that you can hit in a single fight or in a single move, as opposed to, initially, when you first get abilities, the vast majority of them are single target. And so that's how we've tried to approach that, with what I would call a best of both worlds, attempt at the very least. Whether or not we, nail it is, I suppose, subject to debate. But I have always liked the idea of having a crunchy, crafting or research mechanic in a game. I think that's the main thing that D&D 5e is missing, honestly.
And they were missing it. They missed it on purpose.
Oh, absolutely. But it is notable to me that the first time I ever played a 5e game, I wanted to play an artificer, and I went, well, hold up. There aren't really good rules for this. And at the time, they only had the homebrew rules for artificer, or not the homebrew rules, but the
Unearthed
playtest. Yeah, it was the Unearthed Arcana. They hadn't released, the full rules yet, and so I played it, and I was like, okay, this kind of scratches the itch, but I wish there was something a little more crunchy, a little more detail for this, that, and the other thing. And so, some of that desire for I'd love for there to be a way to have some crunch, but also like not an overwhelming amount of crunch, and make something like a fun mini game kind of. And so saying, okay, great, I have these flame control powers, but here's how I want to, mold them to match this idea for a hero that I have. Is kind of the fun mini game that I wish was how crafting worked in 5e. And so, that's not the only place where I drew inspiration from that particular set of mechanics, but it's certainly an influence. Going back to talking about influences, was the crafting system that I wish there was.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. Now, it looks to me that the big things that you're going to be developing, aside from core stats, obviously, is going to be abilities and talents. Now, putting aside that you're going to be getting talents largely from your archetype. Inevitably, somebody's going to want to expand on this list, no matter how big you make the list. So, what would you say is the dividing line between the two conceptually? Like, if someone was making something new, what would be better served as a talent? What would be better served as a talent, and what would be better served as an ability?
Yeah. As we've approached it, talents are things you do, or things that you're very good at doing. But they're things that could be trained. And the only exception to that would be, we have abilities for, like, you're really good with technology, or you're very, like, smart and can build things, or you're very good with weapons, because those are more about, like, practiced, specifically like combat-oriented, practiced things. But I would say that that's like the main, kind of differentiator there is abilities are things that are more or less innate to your character. And you could have trained to get there, but talents are things that you can do with your innate abilities. But they're things that you have to do deliberately or intentionally, as opposed to, at least for many superhero origin stories, you fall into a vat of chemical waste and suddenly you have powers. They're not a thing that you had to work to get. You just have them. Obviously, there are character archetypes out there that, that's not the case. But, in many superhero origin stories, your powers happen more by coincidence and circumstance than they do by, repetitive training.
Now, since the concept part has 3 pillars of origin story, motive, and flaw, all 3 of those are very, even though they have specific descriptors in that quick start, those are still very broad categories. And I'm curious, in the full book, do you have plans on putting advice on what would be a good or bad use of, like, origin story or motive, and provide a few examples to give that guidance?
Yeah, we do have certainly a more detailed section for that in the full book. They are intended to be open-ended, but we give some guidance for how you can think about them in terms of mechanics. But I mean, I'll tell you right now, like, origin story is more or less flavor. It's about kind of what shaped you, a little bit about, like, where you come from, and so the prompt there is, not necessarily how did you get your powers, but, like, what was a really formative experience that shapes your outlook on the world, right? What was your Uncle Ben moment? What was your, Batman watching his parents get shot down in Crime Alley, moment, right? And so, it's meant to be open-ended in that, there could be many, inciting events that could happen that would cause someone to want to, go be a superhero, a paragon. But motive is really something that I believe that characters should have goals, right? I've played in far too many tabletop game sessions, and normally they're like, at a local game store where someone just like shows up. They're like, "Look, I'm here. I'm here because I'm here. I don't want to go do anything." And so then, the GM is like, "Okay, great. Here's our, quest. Here's the plot hook. I'll pay you 100 gold to go do this." And, that player goes, "Okay, but why? I don't want 100 gold. I want, X, Y, and Z other thing." And so, motive is my way of saying, look, if you're at the table, if you're playing this game, your character has something they're trying to accomplish. It could be as simple as like paying the rent every month. And like, look, that feels real. That feels very much like a Spider-Man motive if I had to put one out there. But it's just like, what is your character trying to accomplish? What is driving them forward? Because I think that's really helpful for you to have in mind for a character, but then also that's fuel for a GM to say, okay, great, I can put things in the course of a game session that will incentivize the character and incentivize the player to pick up these plot hooks that I'm putting down, and also then give them a way to say, oh, well, what if you're trying to pay the rent every month? I'll give you $100,000 if you don't interfere with my evil plan, right? And then like that character has to have a moral crisis of, wait, do I, pay my bills for 2 years, or do I, stick to my guns? And so I think there's an interesting narrative space there. And I think a lot of your character concept is narrative as opposed to mechanical. But there are some little sprinklings of motive and flaw in game mechanics, mostly in the way of archetypes. But I'd love to find ways to introduce more, mechanical consequences for those. My gut says we probably don't have the word count for that in the final book, because we also want to make a book that we can ship at an affordable price to people. We can only add so many pages of things that are want to haves as opposed to need to haves before that becomes unwieldy. But we've got some ideas in the works for how to do that. I also was talking with someone else the other day, and they were like, "Hey, so how would I go about playing like a character with arcane origins in this game?" And I was like, sounds like a really great book supplement to me, because you can do it right now, but we don't have great rules for that. Maybe we'll write something, as a supplement for that down the line. But, if you want to play an arcane character right now, you can.
Yeah,
there just aren't rules that tell you how exactly that works beyond you have powers and they're arcane in nature. Great, go. Yeah. And that's just, the nature of like trying to stay focused on what this game needs in order for us to, create a good game and get it out the door, rather than sitting there and going, okay, let me make a massive tome that's a little bit big and a little unwieldy because we're trying to cover every possible circumstance. I firmly believe that the players are smart and the GMs are smart, and they can figure it out. If they've got a framework and a guideline for how to do it, they have every ability to do that themselves.
That framework and guideline is the key part, because I've been critical of some games when it comes to lacking guidance. And an argument that I often hear is, the designer is believing that the players are smart enough to figure that out on their own. And I'm like, you should not rely on veterancy.
Yeah.
You may recall Stan Lee once said, "Every comic is someone's first."
Yeah.
Same can apply when it comes to TTRPGs. Is it possible that some of the people picking up Paragons are going to have some degree of genre savviness? Yes, but there are levels to that. There's the person who might only know of superheroes through MCU stuff, and they might be at a table with somebody who has a vast collection of comics from the Chris Claremont era.
Yeah.
And you can't just assume that everybody's gonna be the latter, or assume that they're gonna be the former, because you have no way of knowing and no way of not knowing. That's why guidance is a big thing for me, even in something like a Supers game, because, well, as I said before, Supers is a very wide net. So
yeah.
Shifting into the whole archetype thing. I know in the quick start it noted about certain talents that you get at different levels. Are there any talents that are not tied to specific archetypes, or are all talents tied to archetypes?
All talents are tied to archetypes as they currently exist. We are working on something for GMs to create their own villains, where we may offer a way to basically deal with the numbers disadvantage that you have with a single villain versus a team of heroes, and figuring out what exactly that looks like. It's still in the works. We've got a concept for how we're doing it. We've got a draft for what we're doing there, but I think it may change. There is something in there right now that includes some like villain talents that, of course, could be somewhere down the line, available to player characters, where a GM says, "Hey, also choose from this," or whatever. But the idea behind kind of locking talents into your archetype, and at certain character levels with your archetype, is primarily that there should be some natural, power progression from the archetype you choose. It shouldn't be, great, you can do this thing, and you don't ever get better at it as your character gets stronger. And so the idea is there should be some natural progression. And so, you take 2 talents at level 1, and you get an additional talent later on. And of course, you can choose to select more talents as you level up if you'd like, but that's entirely optional. But bare minimum, you will get at least 1 more talent without having to, do anything. You just get it as you level up. And that's really, deliberate for us, because we want there to be more to look forward to when you pick an archetype than just, okay, now I have these 2 things and I never have to think about this again. And so it gives you something to look forward to. In the same way, picking abilities, we have abilities that unlock at different character levels. And so, when you're picking an ability now, not only are you picking an ability now, but also there could be a ability at a higher level, whether that's 3rd level or 6th level, that, is available to you because you have the prerequisite now. And so if you pick the prerequisite now, then you can get the one that you really want in 2 levels. And so, that's kind of part of it, is trying to encourage players to plan for the long term. Now, there are, a couple of archetypes that get talents that basically let them choose a talent from another archetype. So there's some flexibility there. But the idea is that, each archetype should have talents that feel kind of uniquely flavored to how that archetype might choose to present themselves. Again, it's more descriptive of how your character might act than prescriptive for how you have to act. But as you choose those archetypes, you're probably going, okay, am I playing someone who's, a bruiser and wants to get up close and personal and throw punches? Or am I playing someone who wants to, kind of fire from a safe distance? Or am I, playing someone who has the capacity to do both? And that's going to inform, what archetype you choose. And so You know,
I can
that's the general approach there.
Yeah. Now, with that in mind, I know you only have four archetypes.
Yeah.
But I'd like to play a little bit of association. Aside from bringing up Spider-Man, which was already done, I'd like to go through the archetypes you have and some characters in various forms of fiction, both in and out of supers, that might fit that particular archetype.
Yeah.
And obviously, the first one is Acrobat.
Yeah, I can think of a few. And I'll tell you, right, we've got 8 archetypes in the full game. So we can run through all 8 if you'd like.
We'll
but
start with
in
the
my
order
mind,
in the quick start.
great. Yeah, in my mind, Acrobat, I think of a few characters. I think Spider-Man is an easy one. But I also think you could have like a Black Widow type character as an Acrobat. I think of Danny Rand, the why am I blanking on his hero name all of a sudden?
Iron Fist.
Yes, I think he'd be a great Acrobat type of character potentially. Although there's some other options you could take there. But I could also see like it's about Acrobat is all about like flexibility and grace and a little bit of elusiveness and accuracy. And so I could also see a world where, like, minus his super intelligence, Reed Richards could be an Acrobat if you take it from a certain approach. I think, well, I mean, there's a whole bunch of characters that I could think of. Black Cat, Catwoman from DC. There's a certain element of finesse and grace to the Acrobat that I think is what makes it distinctive.
All right, I can certainly get that. The second would be Defender.
Yeah, Defender is one of our 2 like up close and personal archetypes. Again, it's descriptive, but people who get their hands dirty, and like to throw punches. And I think of Defender as being like a Luke Cage type character. I would argue that Superman could be a Defender. Definitely Wonder Woman. Although I think you could make an argument for both Wonder Woman and Superman that they could also be commanders, which is another archetype. I'm trying to think other notable Defenders. I've been watching a lot of Invincible recently, the animated series on Amazon, because I'm a big fan of those comics. And I would say that Invincible himself, Mark Grayson, might be a Defender because he's the type of character who, will put his body on the line in order to save somebody else, and that seems like the kind of characteristic that would be, defining of a Defender.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. Facilitator.
Yeah. I was trying to come up with a way to say this is a utility hero without calling them a support. And so we went with Facilitator. But I think there are a lot of great examples of heroes who what they do best is like make other people shine and give other people chances to be in the spotlight. I think Sue Storm is a good example of a facilitator. I think there's a whole genre of hero in My Hero Academia, which is like heroes whose abilities are all about like scouting and reconnaissance, and I think something like that feels very much like a facilitator. I would also, argue. To an extent, if you had like there are iterations of Tony Stark where he's all about building cool tech for other people, or maybe an even better example that would be like Shuri from the Black Panther movies and from the MCU. Absolutely a facilitator, right? She's got some cool tech, some great powers, but really what she does best is empowering other people with her technology, right? She's incredibly smart, and that's her power, is she creates all these cool gadgets and toys and gizmos that empower other heroes to be the best they can be. But I could also see a world... Yeah, absolutely. I could see an argument for someone like Vision. I could see an argument for someone like Hawkeye to be facilitators, in that they play kind of like the role of the team's glue, right? They're there because someone has to make sure that everyone works together well.
Yeah. I think with Hawkeye, it depends on which version you're dealing with.
Oh, sure.
If you're dealing with like MCU Hawkeye, maybe if you're dealing with EMH Hawkeye, I don't see him as a facilitator. And if he is, he's going to never let go of the fact that you had to turn to him for help.
Fair. That's, I suppose, the tricky thing about all of these is you have to pick which iteration of each character are we talking about. But I think
I like Hawkeye and EMH. I always appreciate that kind of character who is a complete arrogant bastard, but the worst part is you can't hate him for it because he can back it up.
Right, absolutely. Well, I think that was what initially drew me to Deadpool in many ways, because he was one of the first comic characters that I really fell in love with, because I was like, man, this guy just has so much attitude, breaking the fourth wall, right? There's just so much charisma for a character like that. He's kind of an asshole, right? He's not a particularly nice character to anybody. He's definitely not a good guy, but there's something about him that you're just like, yeah, no, but I like him anyways.
We all have that friend who we like, but we acknowledge that he's kind of a dickhead. Sometimes we are that friend. I am most definitely that person who everybody has to say, be nice when I'm getting introduced to new people. And
oh, that's funny.
I always have the same response. I'm not making promises if I can't keep them. But obviously the last of the main four is Stryker.
Yeah. I think of Johnny Storm as a Stryker. I think that's where you could get something like the Flash, where it's about hitting hard, and man, if you're running at someone faster than the speed of light, yeah, probably. I know he doesn't actually run faster than the speed of light, but he sure runs fast. But if you're coming at someone 1,000 miles an hour, you're going to hit them pretty hard.
Faster than the speed of light. Are you not running faster than the speed of light? Are you sure about that?
Okay. I suppose again it depends on which iteration here.
You bring up Justice League Unlimited, and I'm not supposed to think of his fight with Luthor.
Okay, fair point. That is a pretty iconic scene. Yeah. Okay. All right. You know what? Yeah, he does run faster than the speed of light sometimes. But I also think there are worlds where your Iron Man would be a Stryker because he's got this kitted out Mark whatever the fuck number it is. Am I allowed to? How much am I allowed to swear here? I just realized
you're allowed to say all the 7 dirty words you can't say on TV because we're not on TV. Also,
excellent.
Fuck the FCC.
Excellent.
I'm
Very
not
good.
paying $5,000 just for someone to say an F-bomb.
Excellent, very good. There are worlds where I think, particularly, in the MCU, in the Iron Man movies, he feels like a striker in that he's built a suit that can blow up whatever he wants, right? And it's about obviously he's using it for all the right reasons, but like, man, he's got an incredibly powerful weapon that he wears around. I also as I think about notable strikers, I think there's an angle where maybe you've got a Hawkeye who's your striker. He's your eyes in your sky, but he's also they're dealing precise and lethal attacks. I think you could argue that Superman could be a striker. I think you could argue that Shazam could be a striker.
The original Captain Marvel.
Yeah. Or Captain Marvel. Either one, I suppose. But there's quite a few heroes that I can think of who would be strikers. And really, I think like the key thing for me when I think about a striker is like they're so focused on damage output that other things fall to the wayside.
I can get that, and a lot of last canon archetypes would certainly fit that. I'd like to take this concept and flip it on its head.
Yeah.
So, if someone said that they wanted to do something akin to Moon Knight, which archetype would you suggest for them?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the key thing for a character like Moon Knight is your abilities are going to stay the same, right? You have the same powers, the same abilities, nothing changes there. I would argue that for each personality, you might play a different archetype.
I could see that.
You need a couple of character sheets, so you can be like, okay, which one am I today? Mark? Okay, all right, here's the sheet. Okay, now, great, I went to bed. Which one am I now? Okay, all right, let's switch out to a different character sheet. But, at least as a GM, that's how I would rule of cool it, because, I think each personality has a different approach to what's important to them.
I will always find it funny that Moon Knight and Deadpool are the two characters that Taskmaster absolutely hates dealing with. And in the case of Moon Knight, he is completely scared shitless of him.
I mean, I would be scared of dealing with Moon Knight too. One, because okay, I'm dealing with an ancient Egyptian god and their powers. That feels kind of intimidating. But then two, depending on which personality you're going to get, you just don't know what you're in for, right? Like...
There was a story in the comics that involved Moon Knight dealing with a vampire organization called the Structure.
Yeah.
And the head of that tutor approaches Taskmaster. He's like, if I pay you a shit ton of money, will you kill Moon Knight? He's like, nope, not doing it. And his analogy with Moon Knight is he compares him to a .45 caliber bullet. Basically, you put one of them through somebody's head, and it's going to be turned inside out and mushroomed for all the damage it does going through brain matter.
Yeah.
And he says that is Moon Knight. He will come at you, and it doesn't matter what happens to him or anybody else if it means getting him. And brings up the fact that the one time he tried killing him, first off, Moon Knight was like, "Go ahead, see if it works this time." Second off, he ended up getting his ass kicked, going to his employers. It's like, I'm out. And Moon Knight crashed a damn VTOL into the building he was in just to get at Taskmaster.
Yeah.
And after that, he's like, I'm not. It's also the fact that Taskmaster's whole thing is being able to mimic people's fighting styles, and Moon Knight's approach is he is completely willing to take punches if it means he can get one in on you.
Yeah.
Which is why it's funny that his approach is literally doing the whole parry this, you fucking casual kind of meme. But,
well, yeah, there's some great Moon Knight memes out there, that's for sure.
yeah, there is, though. I've always recommended people to look at a YouTube channel called The Russian Comic Book Geek, who does these really, really good comic dubs of different comics.
Oh, awesome.
I first found out about him when he did a adaptation of Warren Ellis's run on Moon Knight, who put forward the idea that Moon Knight doesn't have DID, he has brain damage from trying to make sense of all of Khonshu's aspects.
Well, I mean, I can understand that approach. At the end of the day, I'm going to defer to whatever the writers say the character has, but I can certainly see how you could make an argument for a couple of different sources of that particular part of his character.
Because remember, Khonshu has 5 aspects.
Yeah.
Pathfinder, Defender, Embracer, the Watcher of Overnight Travelers, and the Man Who Lives on Hearts, or the One Who Lives on Hearts. Mm-hmm. And basically, the personalities that Knight has are a result of him trying to make sense of all 5 aspects being Khonshu's avatar.
Makes sense to me.
And he likened it to how a lot of devotees never fully know what the mindset of whatever god they serve has. I'm vastly simplifying, of course.
Right.
Now, continuing on from that, there's when it comes to a lot of the defining things with many superheroes is their particular flaws. Superman's not very good with magic or with kryptonite. You have in some cases characters who have a time limit. I'm a big fan of the Garo universe, and they can only utilize their armor for 99 seconds at a time.
Yeah.
When it comes to handling the flaws of a given superhero, is that mostly handled through the flaw part of the character sheet?
Primarily. But again, we do leave that somewhat free form. So if you wanted to say, hey, we're using the example you just gave, right? This is a world where we only have, can use our abilities for 90 seconds, and then we have to, call it off. There's totally a world where you could, have that be a thing on top of it. But in character, I would say that flaws in the system are primarily intended to be not necessarily character flaws, but weaknesses that can be exploited. And that, could include, in the examples we give, someone that you maybe care so much about that you're willing to do something reckless and, potentially dangerous to yourself and others, in order to protect, which, is just compassion in excess.
Mm-hmm. I can certainly get that. And with all of that in mind, what are you shooting for as far as the total page count for the final book?
I think we are going to be probably around 125 to 150. We really want to keep this, manageable and accessible. We don't want it to be too big of a book. And so, our quick start guide comes in around the 50-page mark. And so we're looking to, get a little bit beyond twice that, and also need to include, an appendix with lots of NPCs, and we've got an appendix for, unique gear, and we'll have some other things, kind of included in there as well. We have a whole chapter that isn't in the quick start guide that we kind of, cherry-picked a couple of the best parts from, but there's a whole chapter basically like advising the GM. Here's how to play this game. Here's how to, structure an episode. Here's how to, create villains. Here's some, random tables if you need to come up with a villain name on the fly. Roll a d6 twice, and you choose from Mr. or Mrs. Super, Doctor, whatever, and a couple of words that all pair nicely with those things. And so, trying to make it as accessible and easy for people to run a game and not have to do it all themselves.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. If I've learned anything from my years of comic books, it's to be very wary of anyone who addresses themselves as Doctor.
Yes, for a variety of reasons.
But with that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my temple and enjoy the madness that happens around here.
Yeah, it's been an absolute delight. I've enjoyed talking to you. Getting to talk about superheroes is one of my favorite things, so I'll always take that.
And anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged.
Absolutely. That is how I live my life.
And of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there will be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.